This is the third iteration. The first iteration and second iteration were rejected by the Minister. The principal reason for the rejection was the absence of a 250 metre buffer from HAT, specifically designed to protect Pneumenius madagascariensis, which is, as Richard Wilson knows, curlew, eastern curlew. So this third iteration is about us going back to the Federal Minister and saying that we're prepared to place a 250 metre buffer from HAT to any building infrastructure. So what that means is that essentially we will be meeting the advice that was given to the Minister from Professor Richard Fuller. The Minister, after she visited the site with us, she proceeded to Brisbane and she met with Professor Richard Fuller, who's considered to be Queensland's wader expert.
Excuse me, we can't understand the word you're saying. It's really hard. You're better off, Roger, not to have that on to talk, go naturally.
Okay. All right, so the Minister went to Brisbane and she met with Professor Richard Fuller, who is considered to be Queensland's wader expert. She asked Professor Fuller what his opinion was about the size of the buffer for Turtle Cove. So Richard Fuller's advice was that generally a buffer should be designed based on the site, because every site is different. You can't really apply a generic buffer to every site. Every site must have a unique buffer applied to it based on how you manage the birds effectively. So what Professor Fuller said was that we should carry out what was called a flight initiation distance process, which meant that we would go down to the HAT where the birds were, and we would scare the birds and make noise, and we would try and see what the distance was between us, or the disturbance, and the waders when the waders took off or flew away because they were disturbed. So many of you would be aware that we've got videos on our websites that clearly show that you can drive a tractor and a slasher within 20 metres of HAT and it has no effect on the birds. The birds simply stay there and they're quite used to disturbance, particularly from a tractor and a slasher. So the reason to do the disturbance was for us to be able to say, well, if the disturbance is here and the birds are there and that distance is 100 metres, then we would apply a 100 metre buffer, or possibly 150 metres to give the birds a bit of a leeway. So what we detected was that if you can put a tractor and a slasher and a four-wheel drive within 20 metres of HAT and the birds don't freak out, the birds just go like, yep, cool, it's a tractor, it's not a fox, no, so there's no threat. So we would then think the rationale would be then that we'd be looking at a buffer to HAT of probably 100 metres would be sufficient. However, the Minister made it quite clear in the response to the PER, which was the Public Environment Report, that she would not give us approval unless we had a 250 metre buffer from HAT. So this time we've gone back and said, okay, we will have a buffer from HAT to the development of 250 metres. Now, the design of the development means that we will have a small section of roadway that extends into the 250 by about 20 metres. So there'll be a little bit of road, which will be 230 metres from the birds. So we think that that little bit of road will not actually result in a significant impact to the curlews, because they won't be able to see it, because they'll be 250 metres down the front. And there's a great big hill between the HAT and there's a great big hill in the development. So the people that live up on the development will be able to see the waders, but the waders won't be able to see the development because there's a big hill right in front of them. So we are going to go back to the Minister and say, Minister, we have reduced the footprint from 200 units to 86 units. So there'll be 86 units of independent living units as the development plus roadways. So the proposal has shrunk significantly. Like, we've come down from what was originally proposed to quite a small development and we're confident that going back to the Minister, we can actually argue that all the science that shows clearly that there will be no impacts to any matters of national environmental significance, and there will be no impacts to the curlews, which are a matter, because we're applying a 250 metre buffer. Now, that 250 metre buffer is there because Professor Richard Fuller, the Queensland's most eminent wader expert, told us to. He said you should use a 250 metre buffer. So we're taking Professor Richard Fuller's advice and we're applying a 250 metre buffer. That's what the Minister wanted. So we're sort of confident that now we go back to the Minister, we say, like, thanks very much, Minister, we're now going to give you a 250 metre buffer, and we believe that we can manage all of the impacts to the matters of national environmental significance that were highlighted in the PER. So is anyone here who doesn't know about the PER? Is there anybody here who doesn't know about the PER, the Public Environment Report that was done? Okay, well, we completed a Public Environment Report and we gave that to the Minister, and we argued that we could protect the curlews. The Minister disagreed, and the Minister said, no. Richard Fuller said 250 metres, get lost. No approval.
So how are you going to build the road?
The construction company will do the road.
No, I mean, you got the 250, but it's
Yep.
going down to 230.
No, the 250 will be for the majority of the area. There'll be a small section of the road that will be within the 250, meaning on the edge of it.
So you've got to get approval for that.
So we've got to convince Canberra that that little tiny bit of road is not going to have what was called a significant impact on the curlews.
Was that the only environmental impact that was identified in that report?
Yes. The Minister's conclusions in the PER was that we could handle all of the other M&ESs, which included humpback whales, the GBR, Great Barrier Reef, even though it's 500 k's away. Yeah, hopefully we can manage that. The Indo-Pacific humpback dolphin, which is a dolphin that hangs around river heads that you guys will all know about. They're a specific type of dolphin. So there was an argument that we might impact that dolphin, but the Minister's conclusion was, I'm satisfied you won't impact the dolphin. I'm satisfied you won't impact the GBR, the Great Barrier Reef. I'm satisfied you won't impact migratory whales. And I'm satisfied you won't impact turtles, migratory turtles. I'm satisfied that you won't impact the water quality of the Ramsar. I'm satisfied that you won't impact water mouse, which is a little tiny mouse that might be a turtle cove, but we haven't found it yet. So, there is a record where the council reserve is at Turtle Cove. Just down around the corner from there's a record for water mouse. So it's logical that we might have water mouse, but we haven't found it. But we'll continue to look for it. No, well, it's a little mouse. It's a little mouse that eats crabs. Now, it's possible it's there, but the Minister was satisfied, based on the surveys we did and the research, that water mouse wouldn't be affected. So effectively, all of the matters or species that the Minister listed for us to deal with, she was happy that everything could be dealt with except curlews. So we've had to go back and say, righto, what do we need to do to convince the Minister that curlews can be managed effectively and protected at Turtle Cove? And we believe that the 250 metre buffer will do that, because that's Professor Richard Fuller's opinion. And his advice to the Minister was, they need to do 250. So we're following the Minister's advice and we're following Richard Fuller's advice, and so we would be thinking that the Minister might view it as, well, okay, this is pretty good, they've just about ticked all the boxes. They can protect curlews, so I would have no reason to reject the proposal.
Roger, the sewage treatment plant and the open pond, my understanding is though that would be inside of that 250 metre buffer.
I will leave all questions about the STP to Matt Kearney, who is the STP expert. Matt's company are the company that have produced the report for us. Yep. So Matt has every answer to every question about the STP.
But that would contravene the 250 metre buffer requirement for the Commonwealth if it was inside that.
the significance of the Act is that it would have to be shown to have a significant impact on the curlews. So, based on the fact that these STPs nowadays are extremely green, it would be unlikely that the curlews would suffer a significant impact, even if it was within the buffer. But I understand what you're saying, so we will have to convince the Minister that the STP configuration would not have an impact on the curlews per se, because the impact on curlews has to be significant. So it would be disturbance. So if the STP is like 25 V8s running at once, you'd imagine there'd be a noise disturbance. If the STP had bulldozers driving up and down, munching up the sewerage, then you would imagine there'd be a significant disturbance. But we would be arguing that the way the technology is now with STPs is it's a silent unit. There is no odour, there is no noise. It's completely hidden because it's mostly underground, and we'll be buffering it with significant vegetation so that any of the landowners who live there would just be looking at a vegetated buffer, and the STP would be, no, can't hear it. So you're right, we're going to have to convince the Minister that if we locate the STP within the 250, because if we locate it at the top near everyone's houses, people are going to go, no, I want it down there. So we've got to find that median of where we would locate it so that we protect the waders. And I can tell you now, after studying these waders for so long, and I think Richard Wilson would agree with me here, that as you go north along the foreshore, the wader birds don't seem to utilise the north area of the site as much as the southern area. They love Richard's place, they love to hang out in front of Richard's house, and then when the water comes up, they tend to move up and fly up towards the centre of the clay pan. So we know that's the sensitive area, so we wouldn't put an STP there. We try to put an STP, say, up this end, where it's not going to impact the wader birds, because we know from the research that generally at low tide the birds sit 200 metres from HAT in the middle of the pan. Now when the tide comes in, and Richard's findings backs all this up, when the tide comes in and the water gets too deep for the birds to roost, because it's up to their armpits, most of them fly away and a few of them come to the foreshore and sit on the grass until the tide starts to go back down, and then they march back out in the middle of the mud pan 200 metres away from the foreshore. So essentially birds occupy the 200 metre central section of the mud flat. So that means we've got a 200 metre buffer from where the birds roost to the foreshore, and then we've got a 250 metre buffer up to the development. So we've got 450 metres of buffer for the birds.
That's not quite witness, but I suppose that's the way that
Yeah.
the birds right up against the foreshore is quite numerous as well.
Oh, there can be, you're right. I'm not saying that they never go there, but that's what we've sort of said to the Minister, well, you know, to do it properly, and if we're saying that if we have wader birds on the saltwater cooch roosting, and Trevor drives his tractor and his slasher 20 metres away, the birds don't panic. The birds are habituated to the noise and disturbance. So it sort of leans you towards, well, you know, 250 is a bit overkill, but we have no choice because the Minister is the boss. And the Minister, if we don't give her 250, she's going to tell us to bugger off. So, you know, the killer is that 250 has to be recommended, and we think that that can effectively help the curlews. And bear in mind, they're only here for 6 months a year. The other 6 months they're not here. And what we've found, and Richard's pointed this out, is that the numbers are declining. You know, the numbers are declining not because of Turtle Cove, the numbers are declining because they fly back to China, where China is destroying all of their habitat. The Chinese government does not protect wader bird and curlew habitat. So all of their systems up there are being destroyed. So therefore, every year they come to Turtle Cove, there'll be less curlews. Now that's not something we've created, that's something that China's created, and the minister has to deal with that. That's not our policy, that's the minister's policy. Yes?
Dealing with the wildlife, it's good, I'm glad that the government's doing that. But what about the local people who are going to be close to this retirement village? Like my back veranda is about a year that wall away from my fence line, which is where we're planning on putting this.
Yep.
What compensation are you going to be giving me?
Well, the answer to that is that we can only deal with what the Act says, and the Act says that the only matters we deal with are matters of national environmental significance.
So if the value of my house goes down, because if this goes down, I'm going to be selling, I'm not staying. I moved here so that I can see Fraser Island, enjoy the peace and quiet.
Yep.
If you're going to disturb that, I really this retirement village, I won't be able to see anything except the retirement village. So
That's
the house,
yeah,
the value of my house is going to drop. Are you going to compensate me?
I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and
Now, my answer to that would be that I assume, and I might be wrong, but the average median price of a house in Turtle Cove has not gone down.
no, because that's just the common village hasn't gone in yet, but if it goes in, I'll bet you $1 on they will go there.
Okay, if you've got some economic data for that to be proven correct, I'd love to see it. And I would recommend you make a submission when we do the public submission phase. You make that submission.
What about my piece of fire? What about my view?
Well, that's what your submission is about. Your submission should be, Minister, if you approve this, my quality of life's going to go to crap. Okay? But you have to prove that. And that's exactly why we have a democracy. Is that you should send that submission to the Minister. Dear Minister, this is my house, this is where I live. Here's the evidence and the data that as soon as you allow these guys to build this thing, my property value is going to come down to here. So if that stacks up economically, the Minister will take notice. And that should be part of something that you should have the right to submit on. But we can't deal with that because we can only deal with the Act itself. And the Act doesn't deal with property values, the Act deals with animal values.
But what about everyone else that's built property out there and someone builds a house across the road in front of them? What are they got to say?
Exactly.
And the council said, if you want your view, buy it there.
Well, if we'd have gone to council and said we want to build 3 stories, they would have said, no way, not going to happen.
We bought a 3-storey house and they said, if you want that view, you buy down there.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Can I ask a question about, you know how we also asked the proposed
Yeah.
we just moved here over the number of years. I'm just spending a considerable amount of money putting in a drainage right across the back of my block, 25 metres across the back of my block, and 40 metres up the side of something that comes out in front of the road, because behind us is a hill that goes up like this, and 3 hours after it's finished raining, the water is still coming down into my pit, and it takes 3 hours to pump it out of my pit to the street at 150 metres per minute.
Yeah.
That's the 27,000 litres of runoff water that I'm getting off the hill of that proposed development area. That's just a phenomenon. What's going to happen when that development's there? What do you do with the stormwater? Is that going to just run off onto the land? What do you do with the stormwater and what do you do with the sewage? Where's the sewage going to run?
I'll leave the sewage question for Matt. He can deal with all of that. But the storm water, we've already created a storm water management plan, which council has already looked at, and that storm water plan is open for modification. So once again, I would suggest that you do a submission on the water issues that you see that we can then deal with and incorporate into the plan. I would give your submission for stormwater is managed by the council. So if you have a submission about stormwater issues, that should go to the council because the federal government does not deal with stormwater issues. The federal government deals with stormwater quality, not quantity. So the minister, when she made the decision on the PER, she was confident that there will be no stormwater quality issues arising from the development. Well, that's her decision, not ours. Huh?
We leave it. Have you ever seen a ladder street underwater?
Are you talking about quantity or quality?
That's not quality.
With rainwater.
Yeah.
That's not quality.
Well, I've seen it, but I'm saying the Minister's Department assessed all of the documentation we gave them, and their conclusion was that they were confident that there will be no stormwater quality impacts to the Ramsar from the proposal. Because all of the stormwater that comes into Turtle Cove has to be treated to a point where, when it gets discharged to the Ramsar, it won't impact the water quality values. Now, the Minister's... It's the same, council is quantity. So if you believe that there's an issue for stormwater quantity as a result of Turtle Cove, that's an issue for council to deal with. So do your submission, give it to the council and say, this is what we think, right? Because council has to deal with that, not the federal government. I know it's a pain in the butt, but the feds go up here and the state goes down there and the local government goes down there. So there's 3 levels that we have to deal with. Yeah.
How can the quantity change? There's no more rain.
Well, the quantity is based on a model.
Yeah, but we've got the same rain now.
Yeah, that's right.
Same quantity of rain.
Yeah,
And if you've got drainage, it's got to go.
that's right. So I understand what you're saying, and you know, the proposal cannot get council approval unless the council's satisfied that we've managed everything correctly. So even if the minister approves, it still has to go to council, and council then might say, oh, well, that's okay, the minister said yes, but there's a problem here. So
What about all the rainwater that comes down off that hill, down Banner Street, and goes into a creek on your property?
that's right.
And what happens then? You've got to build houses over the creek.
No, that's got to all be engineered correctly,
Oh, yes.
yeah, to be able to prove that there's not a stormwater issue.
Oh,
Right? No, that's how it works. And as I said, that would only be approved if council agrees. If council is satisfied that everything's done correctly, then they will approve it. And they do that with every subdivision. We have to now prove that our subdivisions do not impact downstream. That's what it's about. So council knows that we have to abide by what's called the Fraser Coast Water Quality Management Plan, and therefore council would not approve it unless they were satisfied that the water quality coming out of Turtle Cove is better than the water quality coming down Havana Road. Because all of the pollution from Turtle Cove upslope comes through Turtle Cove. So all of the pollution that is created by the houses that live on the hill comes directly into Turtle Cove sites. And we have to manage that water. We have to be able to treat that water so that when it's released to the marine environment, it's in really good condition. Otherwise, we won't get approval.
So where do you build?
that's runoff. That's not pollution. It's plain rain runoff.
Yeah, but it's polluted.
It's not polluted.
Have you done a water sample of the site?
Oh, you?
Yes.
Okay.
So
It's all in the permit. The whole system, the bioretention system and the treatment train has to be built within the waterways. So we have to have a balance between allowing the water to get through, but also allowing the water to be treated.
filtration.
Got to have filtration to treatment. That's the way it goes. It's all in the PER. If you're interested, I can put a copy of the PER on our websites and direct you to that PER, and you can download that PER and read all the stormwater quality management plans that have gone into it. It's all been done.
And that means the council approves.
Well, it will only happen if council is ultimately satisfied. Like, even if the federal minister's satisfied, the local council is a different process. So the local council has to be satisfied that we've got it right. Even if the minister thinks we've got it right, council still has to be confident.
So this is any development is a good development, but it's approved or not.
Look,
They said it on TV, any development is a good development for the city, for the town.
Look,
So
to be-
if you approve it
Yeah. Well, to be honest, mate, I've done this for 30 years. I can tell you there are a lot of approvals we struggle to get because of council. The federal government and the state government tend to look at it from the big picture and they go, yeah, that's pretty good. We're happy with that. Council looks at it from the local picture, and the Fraser Coast Council has been very strict with us at Turtle Cove. They want this to be right and they won't give us approval unless it's correct. It's quite simple. If we get through the federal hoops, we don't have to get through the state hoops because the state's already approved it, but we have to get through the Fraser Coast hoops. So that'll only happen if the Fraser Coast Council is satisfied that we've got it all right. And the idea is, if you people want to write submissions to the council, that's great because you could highlight issues that we may have missed. So even if the federal minister goes, yep, that's great, you've still got an opportunity at a local government level to raise your issues, particularly stormwater. You can raise those issues with the council. Council will come back to us and go, well, how are you going to fix that? That's called the process of getting it right. Because we can't go to council and say, oh, we think we've got it right, mate. They're not, no way. They'll go through with a fine-tooth comb, I can assure you. And so, rest assured, this won't be a steamrolled approval. This will simply be, for us at the moment, it's the federal approval. And if we get the federal approval, that's fine. We've still got to get the local government approval.
One thing you won't get is the approval of the local residents, because over 85% of people oppose the sewage treatment plant down there, and they don't want a sewage treatment plant in their backyards or in their vision, and so, you know, you're never going to get that up.
Do you know what the sewage treatment plant looks like?
Everybody's going in their backyard.
I'll leave that question for Matt. Does anybody have any more federal questions? What's the land size, Brian, for the ILUs? 600 or 400? The land, the plot size, the lot size for the ILUs is 400? 350. 350. No.
You can build your own.
Yeah.
So if you want to build a two-story and block the breezes on the view, you can do so.
You would have to get council approval.
Yeah, that's right. But there's nothing to stop people doing it.
Oh, there's nothing to stop people attempting to do it. Yeah. But that's not a federal issue. Is there any other questions federally or federal issues?
Yeah, when you were talking about the water runoff,
Yes.
going into the Cove,
Yes.
is that the water runoff that the rain dumps onto the Cove, or is it a whole lot?
All of the rainfall that falls on Turtle Cove from Riverheads Road, which is the crest, all the way around, follows the contour around, goes down Bankson's Road, down through Cove. All of that slope, what we call the Turtle Cove slope.
It doesn't all run off into the thing, because where I live, the house next door, when it rains, the block down bottom on the council part with the wall, you can't walk there because it's flooded. And it takes at least a month and no rain for that to clear up.
Well, that is because
That's why it's hard.
Fraser Coast, yeah, that's right. That's because Fraser Coast Council allowed Turtle Cove to be developed without intelligent engineering. To the drainage corridors. All of the drainage corridors, our two corridors at Turtle Cove take all of the rainfall. So what I'm saying is that all of the pollution and the elements of that rainfall that comes off people's properties, which is going to be nitrates, phosphates from dog poo, cat poo, fertiliser that you add to your grass, petroleum from the roads because there's cars with oil leaks, etc., etc. That all gets washed into our property. So we've got to polish that water. That all goes into our property, and the government said you must polish that water so that when you release that water to the Ramsar, it won't affect anything. Right? And at the moment it just goes like straight through.
Isn't that area designated open space?
Yes.
So how can you build something on 350 square metres?
Well, that's a question for the council to answer. Yeah. I mean, that's not a council question. That's not a federal issue. That's a council issue.
So why is it that you're still pushing this development, even though the Commonwealth government have come through and said, no, you can't do it?
Well, because the federal government came through and said, the reason why we can't approve it is because you are not giving us a 250 metre buffer for curlews.
Still not.
Still not.
Still not. And we don't want
No, but,
it. We don't want it.
well then you write a submission to the minister saying you don't want it and give
We've
her,
already done that. We've got a thing like this last year.
that's right, which she ignored.
Like a report that a child could have done. And we
Sorry?
did that, and the council came back and said,
Can you reiterate that comment about a report that a child could have done? No, so you would rather go to personal attack than objective analysis of the process? Well, write to the minister and voice your opinion.
just sue the bastard.
Okay, well, if there's no further questions about the EPBC Act, I'm happy to hand it over to Matt Kearney from Envira, who can give you the overview of the STP. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for your time. Thank you.
I'm a director of Envira. We specialise in environmentally sustainable. Oh, Matt McHenry from Envira, and we specialise in environmental sustainable treatment of wastewater and reuse of wastewater as well. I'm an environmental scientist and I have 15 years experience in this space. Primarily the work takes me between Queensland and the Northern Territory, and we specialise particularly in developing wastewater treatment and reuse solutions for environmentally sensitive locations, as well as rural and remote locations, and of course Indigenous communities as well. The concept that we are proposing for Turtle Cove is not new science. It's something that we've successfully delivered on a number of projects many times before, and it comes down to the approach that we take in terms of a selection criteria of technology to achieve certain outcomes in wastewater treatment. It's particularly important to emphasise that we don't see wastewater as a waste. We see it as a resource that can be reused and treated for beneficial purposes. We are supplied by an American company called Orenco, who produce very well engineered technologies and treatment systems, and we integrate that with evapotranspiration technologies in order to reduce the wastewater output in a sustainable and environmentally friendly manner before we polish the wastewater to a standard that can be beneficially reused on site. Before we can get to installing a wastewater treatment system, we have to go through a very rigorous approval process with the Department of Environmental Science, who is the Queensland regulator for on-site wastewater treatment and disposal. And that approval process requires a very thorough environmental risk assessment of the site to ensure that there's going to be no environmental impact nor public nuisance from the treatment, not only the treatment but also the disposal of wastewater. And in that approval process, we usually look at ways that we can beneficially reuse the recycled water once it's been treated in scenarios such as greening of landscape, watering of gardens. We've even gone as far to design treatment strategies that the recycled water can be reused for toilet flushing and things like that, and that just limits the amount of treated wastewater that needs to be disposed of to land. To dispose of the land, we have to model that using particular software that predicts and estimates environmental impact based on the amount of wastewater or recycled water that's been applied to the land, and also the physical and chemical characteristics of the soil that's going to be receiving it. And that ensures that everything is done sustainably and there's going to be no impacts such as deep leaching to groundwater, runoff, pooling, and also ensures that the crops or the plant species that we're using to water are going to perform efficiently all through the year. So that's the approach that we're taking to this site and to this project. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have about the wastewater treatment process, or what the concept, or any concerns you might have. And I'll invite anyone to ask me some questions now.
Is this the same trip that you were looking at doing last time?
Last time?
Same one?
Yes, in the report.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I was told the last time when this was going on, that treatment plant was known for breaking down and for an enormous amount of smell. So you're going to say now?
No, yeah, I would refute that absolutely. So, number one, there's no smell because the whole treatment process is contained. These are not open treatment systems such as activated sludge plants or waste stabilisation lagoons. Every part of the treatment process is contained in a structurally sound vessel. Once the target, the water quality target that will be treating to is Class A. So that is practically clear water with no odour and no smell. So when you're irrigating it, there's no smell whatsoever. In terms of the treatment technologies, the company that supplies the equipment to Enviro is an American company called Orenco, O-R-E-N-C-O. You're more than welcome to look up their website. They have 40 years experience in this space. They supply wastewater treatment technologies all around the world, including all through America, Canada, the Pacific Islands, New Zealand, even Alaska. They've done one for the American military in Iraq, and all those case studies are available on site. The projects that I have delivered using Orenco technologies range from, I've got 2 on Stradbroke Island. I'm about to do one for the Queensland Government on Magnetic Island. That's, as you know, that's in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, so that has a very was a very tight approval process to get that through. I've just delivered one for Spices Resorts. If we know or familiar with Spices, it's a high-end tourism operator. They just a couple of years ago, they completed some eco cabins up in the Main Range National Park, which is a World Heritage listed national park. So again, we were under the same federal scrutiny as what this project is now. We successfully delivered those projects, and you're welcome to look it up on their website. They're called the Spices Scenic Trail, I believe, and there's 2 sites, one called Amphitheatre Camp and the other one's called Timber Getters Camp. I've just finished a project in the Northern Territory at a place called Timber Creek, which is a very remote location. It sits on the border between Northern Territory and Western Australia. It's a traditional owner town that has a couple of tourism, like caravan parks. We just completed a project on that site there, which the existing treatment system was hemorrhaging and not treating to a standard, so the EPA had put a notice on them to shut them down, and we successfully installed one of our system, and it's operating very, very well, and it's ensured that tourism park continues to operate and trade. So we have a lot of successes using these treatment technologies, and I can provide you with case studies and even water quality data in terms of treatment reduction and treatment achievements that we have successfully achieved.
Matt, I understand that in our ideal world, these systems work quite well, and the water quality is of a good standard when everything is ideal. But we do live in an area of extreme weather events, and I cannot see how this system could not be prone to a possible failure in a very extreme weather event. And the consequences of that on the Ramsar Claypan and the Great Sandy Straits, we only get one chance. And once that chance has been broken, the damage is done. Now, we've heard from experts, Merrimah, levee bank there to protect the CBD from flooding. Brisbane City, Rivercat, Ferryton would be floodproof. They're not. They failed. Mother Nature beat them. That's my scare with this proposal, is that you can say in an ideal world we're at no risk, but I find it very difficult to believe that the risk is zero, and if there is a failure, we can't repair those consequences. It's too late.
Fair enough too. So number one is that the treatment technologies that I deploy are all self-contained and in the ground. Number two is that we can't get an approval to install that in a flood-prone area, so I just would not be able to get that through the Department of Environment and Science. And number three is to look at exactly what can go wrong in an extreme weather event. Again, for the approval process, for we to get approval through this for the Department of Environment and Science, I need to demonstrate to them that we have the appropriate contingency plans and emergency management plans in such events, which include also power backup. Our treatment plant also, it's not a centralised treatment plant, it's over multiple vessels, so the redundancy is spread over multiple units. There's no bypass of the infrastructure. Generally, your standard wastewater treatment plants have in the headworks, they have bypass in terms of if there's a treatment upset, then they can flick a switch and just discharge or divert raw sewage around the treatment plant. Our treatment plants don't have that because we don't need that, because the flows coming from each individual unit are coming from already through what we call a step tank, a septic treatment and effluent pumping. They capture solids at the source and they stay in that tank. From there, it's pumping primary clarified effluent down to the downstream treatment plant. So what that means is we're not pushing all the solids and all of the abuses that go down to the toilet into one central treatment plant. We're effectively separating the sludge and the scum and the abuses at the source, and that undergoes anaerobic digestion just as any normal septic tank gets done. So already we've got treatment in the collection process itself, and that ensures that the treatment plant downstream, the secondary treatment plant, is going to operate more efficiency. Again, our treatment plants are configured to work on generator backup as well if we lose power, and they're not open systems, they're highly durable and installed in the ground. So if there was a flood, then they shouldn't have given us, it can't be affected by a flood because we can't get approval to build in a flood zone in the first place.
There's no open pond evaporation?
No, absolutely not. We did suggest or propose a storage pond of the final recycled water at the back end based on the original concept of putting a much larger or building out a much larger number of units. Now that's been scaled back to 86. We can actually store that in tanks because it's 50,000 litres a day. What the department requires as a minimum is 5 days wet weather storage on your peak flow. So essentially we'd be installing a 250,000 litre tank. Now that could be in multiple tanks or one big panel tank. So there'll be no open wastewater treatment process interacting with the atmosphere at all. Everything is completely contained.
How much of this treatment plant is above ground?
Well, the storage tank will be, of course. Sorry. Well, it depends on what the final design will be. We could end up putting in multiple 33,000 litre rainwater like polyethylene tanks.
How high above ground is that?
So that'd probably be no more than 2.5 metres. So for a 33,000 litre tank, so.
And are you going to landscape around it so we don't see?
So absolutely. So I probably should point out when I spoke about the evapotranspiration system, that effectively is a contained hydroponics system, and it's a step that comes after the Renko system, whereby we connect or we install multiple plastic tubs into the ground, interconnected with pipes, and we plant them with a mixture of native flora, number one, and also a clumping variety of bamboo. And what that does by the process of evapotranspiration, which is really just a fancy word for plants that drink water, that as it grows, it actually reduces the overall footprint or the overall volume of recycled water that needs to be irrigated. So that essentially becomes, I've submitted a report to Brian that shows a lot of photos of similar systems that we've installed. It effectively becomes a landscaped area, which you don't see the pipe work and the treatment process in the ground, you're just seeing the garden beds above the ground.
So the tanks?
The tanks,
You don't build anything above ground other than the gardens?
we can install, if the storage tanks can be above the ground, but they're no different to a plastic rainwater tank that's going to be on the farm of that volume.
You said there's a number of tanks.
Yep.
So this starts back up where the buildings are?
Yep.
And then comes down to another tank before it gets to
Yep.
the treatment tank?
That's right. So it'll come in all our tanks. The main treatment plant, the tanks are concrete. They're installed in the ground, and then we have what's called textile filters, which are installed halfway into the ground. So they'll probably sit about this high up. Effectively, what they are, they're fabric filters, And what they do is they create an environment for the beneficial bacteria that we use to treat wastewater to proliferate and to basically consume all the organic and the pollutants in the wastewater. And from there, that'll go through, it'll be discharged through the evapotranspiration system and recirculated. From there, it'll go through a control, there'll be a control room where it gets final disinfected. At this stage, that becomes Class A wastewater, ready for storage and then reuse. It's big enough to house the control panel and the disinfection equipment. Typically, sorry?
Like the size of a garden shed, the size.
Oh, it'd be a bit bigger. Typically, we use modified shipping containers for that. 10 foot by 10 foot, which will house the control panel. They're climate controlled to make sure the control panel works. That control panel also has a 4G network into it, which sends out, if there is an alarm, it'll send out alarms to anyone who wants to receive it in real time. It allows me also to log into the system at any time I need to, so I can download pump logs, I can assess how much volume the system is treating, and I can also assess if there are any issues and identify what they are. The American company also, they can log into that system and provide support whenever that's needed, and that's all housed in just a standard control room, the design of which can be, confirmed by the overall architect to fit in with the actual overall design of the development.
How many things that so far there's the storage tanks, so there's refuel them. Then you said there could be some other ones that have there so far.
Wastewater treatment yeah, that's right. Wastewater treatment is very complicated to get it to.
How much stuff is actually going to be?
It'll be in a contained area in terms of, these are not dotted around the place. So typically if we're doing a 50,000 litre system, I'd be using 5 AX100 textile filters. They'll be fed from probably 2 22,000 litre concrete tanks which are installed on the ground. So all you'll see is round lids on top of those. The evapotranspiration system will be a green screening, so you won't see the tubs under the ground, you'll just see the bamboo. Typically I configure that to screen the actual treatment plant, so because it's modular in design, it's very flexible in how I can design it to provide natural screening. And then the storage tanks will be located in an area where they're going to be best placed in terms of supplying water to an irrigation or reuse scheme.
I don't know about other people, but I'm very visual, so what you're describing to me, I can't imagine. You've obviously got websites, because you said that you've done projects in other areas.
Yep.
So if you could just give those, that website, so people...
Not a problem. On the actual Facebook page, there's the report, that concept report that we provided. Throughout that report are multiple photos of the projects that we've delivered. There's also a schematic in there as well, but it's of the treatment process. It's just general, but there is a lot of visual information in that report. Again, Orenco, if you want to look up the Orenco website, ORENCO website, they've got a multitude. They've even got two of my case studies up there, which was for Timber Creek and the other one was for Scenic Rim for spices.
How many buildings or containers or whatever are going to be above ground, up top of where you're going to plan on putting this sewage system?
The final location and design is still yet to be completed, subject to the approval process with the department.
So you don't know how many containers or...
Well, there'll be at least one control room, which will be just a small general utility room. The final design will be subject to the architect. The treatment equipment, again, all the tanks are in the ground except for the recycled water storage tanks. Again, they're like any real poly tank you see out on the farm. The main concrete tanks are installed into the ground. The evapotranspiration system is all subsurface, and all you see on top of that is the bamboo and native trees and grasses growing out of the ground.
So the bamboo you're planting, clumping bamboo.
Correct.
And do you realise the fact that ideal site for rats? Because I have some at home and I ended up putting it out because the rats were breeding in the clumping bamboo. So those people up there, up on top of the first post, are going to have a problem with rats, aren't they?
I've never had I've installed.
Our neighbour has the same problem as that, and they have to rip them out because the whole street or half the street was full of rats, and they all came from that bloody bamboo.
What species was the bamboo?
It was a clumping bamboo.
Yeah, so the clumping variety we use is Bambusa Old Hamii, and the other one we use is Bambusa Larco Timor Black, and you're welcome to work. I've never, through the Queensland or the Territory, had a problem with rats. If they're going to breed in bamboo, they'll probably breed in anything else. But again, I've never had issues with the varieties of bamboo that I use. It sounds like it. Because the blocks are too small. There's planning that prevents that in terms of on-site sewage systems because the blocks are too small. Yeah, so it's a good question. So the key to providing or delivering sustainable wastewater treatment systems is basically the treatment process itself. If you deploy a highly complicated wastewater treatment process, it's going to need an equally skilled operator to maintain and operate. The treatment systems we do from Marenco, they're very, very simple in terms of the treatment process, and it relies on passive growth attached treatment processes. So the maintenance requirements for it is absolutely minimal compared to the other type of technologies such as activated sludge plants and things like that. So we generally will provide a quarterly visit in terms of a major service and assessment, but generally we will train the local caretaker, plumber or whoever wants to take on the maintenance just to do the general monthly stuff, because it is really simple and you don't need a certificate-free wastewater operation to maintain these treatment plants.
Do you live next door to one?
Do I live next door to one?
Do you live next door to one of those?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No. Yep. I've got them. I'm happy to post up on Facebook some examples of projects we've delivered. We've got one that's right next to a beer garden of a pub, of the a pub called the Howard Springs Tavern in the Northern Territory. We've got them right next to these. Yeah. Oh, have you? How long ago?
Well, a few years ago.
Okay. Was there a lot of bamboo at the front car park when you were there? Or can you remember? Yeah. Well, it was going to get shut down, that pub. But yeah, we did. So we did that one there. Again, the spices, eco cabins, the treatment. It's critical that there's no odour or noise also to these people that are using these eco cabins who are paying a lot of money.
I think the main thing for probably a lot of us,
Yep.
we all fought out there.
Mhm.
I've only been out there say 10 years.
Mhm.
When we went out there, the view was beautiful. There was supposed to be multiple stones through there, which wouldn't encroach on anyone. Most of us live up on a hill, so we're going to be going straight down on the hill. So it doesn't matter how
I
much
understand.
screening and stuff you put up. We'll still be looking over that screening.
Yep.
I don't want a sewage system down here in my street.
Yep.
So how they understand that, what do you understand about that from the residents at Turtle Cove, overlooking that from, like this lady says, this important area with magnificent views, and that's what we're going to be looking at. Would you like to look at that every day? Would you like that to be your breakfast view?
Well, in all honesty, I'm here to answer questions about wastewater treatment process, not, in my opinion, what I need to be looking at. So, but I'm happy to provide as much supporting material to you guys as you need that might satisfy these type of questions. Again, infrastructure is infrastructure. It's an essential service, and it needs any type of development like this that's decentralised requires it, whether it be water, sewage or power. The key is to deploy environmentally sustainable approaches to either three of those services, and this is my speciality in this place. Of course, nothing is going to be invisible in terms of what we provide, but we take every step to make sure that it is as less obstructive as possible.
Do you think this position where this development's happening is the best place in Turtle Cove for it to be?
It's not a question that I've been brought here to answer.
Question I'm asking.
I can't answer that question. I'm here to answer questions about wastewater treatment. That's my speciality.
Are they using solar?
Sorry, yes, they can be used for solar.
If they're going to be using solar,
Oh, are they using?
are you going to be using solar as your...
That hasn't been. If that was a requirement, then yes, we can go into silo, and that's based again because this is not the treatment plants we do are not heavy industrial type treatment plants requiring, using industrial blowers and mixers and chemical augmentation and things like that. We use high head bore pumps for the recirculation that operate intermittently, so they've got very low power requirements, and that allows me to install these treatment plants in rural areas of Queensland and Northern Territory that don't have reliable power supplies.
So will you need solar panels as well as treatment plant?
It hasn't been confirmed to me that that's the power option that's going to be employed, but it's if they want to, it can run off a solar.
Majority of the people in Cove have home treatment plants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're checking in 3 months on their houses.
Yep.
And once every year or so, the council check to make sure everything's okay. Now, what verification and check are you going to put on this thing to say, yes, it's up to speed? Is it going to be monthly, yearly? Independent verification is talking about.
Yep. Council will play a role. The department, ultimately our operating permit will be between the state government, Department of Environmental Science. That will require sampling. So with your on-site domestic systems, you don't have to require to sample. With commercial systems, you do. And what we are looking at when we're sampling, we're seeing if it's meeting its design or its treatment targets appropriately, or what it was designed to do. We need to report that information back to the Department of Environmental Science. It's a condition. Usually it's depending what the reuse is. If there's a high degree of human contact in the reuse, it could be weekly, but generally it's a monthly sampling process that has to go to the samples need to be collected and delivered to a NATA accredited laboratory. And that can be done by site caretaker on site. Again, we offer our services with every treatment plant that we deliver. I strongly recommend that Enviro is engaged to maintain it and to oversee it. And also we will look to for local resource as well in terms of local plumbers and things like that, in terms of backstop if needed.
Also, you're going to dig holes down there, it's all acid sulphate soil. How do you propose controlling that acid sulphate soil so you don't get runoff into the Ramsay area? Please don't tell me with lime, because lime is a hazard in its own right.
No, well the regulations wouldn't allow us to install those areas. So again, in terms of the detailed environmental assessment, I understand I haven't completed that yet and get engaged to do that around in terms of getting that approval, but that process will involve identifying constraints such as acid sulphate soil, such as flood-prone areas, such as sensitive environmental areas that we would have to avoid for the treatment, to install the treatment plant and install the irrigation areas as well.
So that will be announced how it's all going to be done prior to the start.
I would assume so, yes.
I
Of course.
have a comment on acid sulphate. We had produced an acid sulphate management plan for the other 2 applications.
Yes, you did.
And that acid sulphate management plan is part of the third. So if I can load that acid sulphate management plan onto our website, and we can download copies of it.
But Roger, last time, I was just reading the line on that secure. Now, line is a hazard. If it blows onto these people and back onto that, they're going to have trouble.
Well, the acid sulphate management plan is to be authorised by the council. And council has to oversee that plan and make sure that plan adheres to all those requirements, which is us, emissions for potential storage or whatever. It's all there in the acid sulphate management plan, which has been ticked off by the federal government. So I'll give you a copy of that onto the website, so you can download that plan and read that plan and see exactly what it says.
So you're putting it back on the council. Anyway, what is your website?
Turtle Cove, Facebook.
Turtle Cove.
Turtle Cove, China. Turtle Cove,
Oh, yeah.
China. Yeah.
2CHO.
Yeah, Facebook. So we've got a Facebook page and we've also got a website that's linked to the Facebook page.
Okay.
So I'll put all the technical requirements that you guys are looking for on the website with a link from Facebook to that. So if you link on Facebook, it will take you to the other side. You then download whatever reports and technical documents that you require.
So if we think or suspect there's going to be trouble with that, we raise it to the council. Jointly, individually, which?
Yes, because the Fraser Coast Council is the assessment manager for acid sulphate within the region. So all issues surrounding acid sulphate have to be dealt with by the council. Well, we invited all the councillors. Dennis Chapman's here, which is great. Another comment I think I need to make people I need to make earlier, which is we actually approached the Riverheads Progress Association. We wrote to them and asked them to hold this meeting at the hall at Riverheads. And the Progress Association wrote back to us and said, no, we don't agree that that's a good idea, so at this point in time, we wouldn't agree to a meeting that held at the Riverheads hall.
That was
That's all right.
that was because your information wasn't complete. You couldn't supply any information about where the sewage treatment plant is going. So we...
That was the purpose of the meeting. It was the federal government dictated to us that we have to hold a public consultation process here. And we asked the Riverheads Progress Association if we could hold that meeting at the hall so that we could have Matt, myself and Brian Clark come to the hall to say to you guys driving here. So the reason why you're doing here is because the Progress Association refused to allow a meeting at the hall.
That's false. We were seeking more information and you were not willing to supply it.
The document we received back from the Riverheads Progress Association was authored by Malcolm Booth.
No, it was authored by the committee, which Malcolm
The document says the author is Malcolm Booth. So the document was written by Malcolm Booth. The document said, you will not be having a meeting at the Riverheads Progress Association, which is really interesting because your association is supposed to be a progressive association that deals with progress.
We are progressive and we're looking after the residents.
Right, let me claim it. The purpose of this meeting is because the government say you must that way. What the government says is that you ask questions, you put your proposal to the government, they come back with a series of questions, then after that, the government reassesses it with your questions, and at that point, when everything's finalised for the government, then you come and have the meeting. You haven't answered the government's questions that they put to you last year. As of yesterday, the government said, no, we've heard nothing back. And the reason that we said this wasn't the right time of the meeting is because you can give us general information, but you can't tell us the answer of what is actually going to occur. You can only tell us what you think you want to occur. And so therefore, as a committee, we said, it's not the right time to have a meeting. Get the questions answered to the government, come back and tell us the complete answers.
Yes,
That was what
the federal government wrote to us and said that we must demonstrate that we have created a public consultation process. And this is just the start. So the first start was to say, was to write to you guys to see whether we can have a meeting with you guys.
Sorry, this is the flow chart of the government's actions, and it doesn't say you have a public meeting before you answer the government's questions. It says you have it after. It's on the government website.
I will load that document for you to read on the website.
That's the government document. And it says when you should be doing this. At the moment, all you can say to us is this is what we plan to do, but you can't tell us what's approved. And what we want to know is what's approved. There's some good information. Thank you very much for that. That's excellent. But it's still only a premature meeting where you give us a bit of information. You can't tell us what exactly will go in. You can only tell us what you think will go in. Thank you, Ron.
If you don't mind, we can't do anything further than what we have done. I've been working on this for 9 years to try and get a material change of use over this project. Now, let me tell you something. 9 or 7 years ago, I'm Brian Clark on the and we can finish this off a little later on if we like to have some refreshments or something. But I think it's this little concern that there seems to be here. We can't proceed any further. Okay, maybe that's a bit better. But 9 years ago, and in 2013, I approached the council to try and see what I could do with this land. I designed it about a year or so before that, and I presented the design. There's two of them, copies of it over there, one in the 2nd of July 2013 and the other one in 2015. Now, when I went to the reason I went to the council with this new design and asked for a material change of use to the existing approval, which was an 18-hole golf course with a golfing resort attached to it. Now, the golfing resort and the golf course itself was disallowed by the federal government because of chemical runoff from herbicides and so forth, which I thought was a bit ridiculous, quite frankly. But at the same token, we were told that it would not be approved at the referral level. Had been approved by the state government, had been approved by the local council to a degree. They suggested, and there were 13 councillors at the meeting when we went there. When I say we, I mean myself, my town planner and my architect, with the plans that we proposed for a material change of use. We never cancelled the golf course approval either. So that could still perhaps go on, I don't know. And I'm not a major developer like a lot of you people think that I am. I'm more or less a type of person that looks around for opportunity. I buy land, get approvals from the council for it to be developed or improved to an extent that it's worth more money. And that's what I intended to do, and that's still my intention. I just want to sell the land and move on. And now, after 20 years, I can't believe that I've run into these sort of problems. I won't ever go near anything that has government connections to it, that's for sure. But I got stuck with this one. Now, having been stuck with it and having spent so much money in consulting fees and so forth, I haven't even had to do reports on the Midge, how we can deal with them, how we can deal with the water, the sewerage, with everything. I've gone through the lot and presented it to the various authorities. Now that we've been knocked back and we've been told that we must have a 250-metre buffer to the curlers, which has just knocked us over, because we did tests with the tractor and slasher that we use. Not only that, Trevor will tell you, because he's been slashing and keeping the grasses down, and you might notice over in those on the desk there, a front page article where Trevor's house was almost burnt down and several other people's houses. Why? Because of the grass fires. So ever since then, I've been slashing it at my own expense, keeping it down and protecting your properties from ever having a similar problem. What your attitude would be if we tried to, or if we put in an application for half-acre or 1 acre blocks?
2,000 square metres.
2,000 square metre blocks on that land. Who would...
Brian, if you did that,
Yes.
and there was no infrastructure within the 250 metre buffer zone, so no sewage treatment plants, no infrastructure, and you put 2,000 square metre blocks on any other available land that you own, you're not going to get any cotton from me.
Not from you, yeah.
You won't get flights from most people.
I'm sorry?
Sorry. You won't get flights from most people if you rent the half-acre blocks. And at the moment, the half-acre blocks are selling for in excess of $400,000, and you can fit a lot in there. And that would be an easy way out of the property.
It'd be wonderful if I could get the approval to do that.
Don't you have that in your current zoning?
I'm sorry?
Don't you have that in your current zoning?
No, because it's been de-zoned down to open space and, what is it, open space and environmental issues. I don't know how it got to that extent, but it did.
It's an environmental issue. The 2,000 square blocks
lost there, I'm afraid. I have a total of 286 acres. Of that 286 acres, approximately 150 acres has been set aside for a private marine national park, so that the birds would be protected. The idea of having the retirement village, the over 50s retirement village, was because I thought that it would be great to be able to have a boardwalk and have views of the birds and so forth in the early stages. All of that's been knocked on the head, and I'm stuck now with a 250 metre buffer from HAT. That leaves me with about 10% of the land to do anything with.
Sell it as individual blocks. No, we'll make a killing on the sales. The price of land.
You're not listening. The problem is, if we did the MHE, we can bring the house blocks down to about 350 square metre
Then you'll
blocks.
need a sewage treatment plant.
I'm sorry?
Then you'll need a sewage treatment plant to service all those blocks. That's what the residents don't know. If you maintain the same demographics as what we've got now with 2,000 square metre blocks and have their own eco-friendly individual sewage treatment plants, I don't think you're going to have too much fight.
What would you think, Dennis?
Yeah, well, ladies and gentlemen,
This is Dennis. He's with the
I'm
Fraser
very
Coast.
involved, I'm very involved in planning and infrastructure. That's the reason I'm coming along, just to hear what's going on. I've got no conflict around over this project, but we're doing the same sort of things in the old woods. Now there's a golf course that's been proposed in the old woods, and that's actually on the town plan as open space. But it's through a material change of use, it can be turned back to residential land. And that's, if you watch next Wednesday, there's going to be a council meeting where we actually are looking at doing, there's going to be a vote on doing that. So if this is one way of the drawing, the developer, if you can, if it's one way of looking at it, if it's going to keep people happy around the community, but can I also say that having all these separate treatment plants and having one treatment plant, I was actually a building designer and I used to design, I had a license in designing treatment plants. And going to Orchard, we actually put a treatment plant up there. I know it's not around any residential or anything, but all that you saw was 3 big concrete tanks in the ground, and then everything else was disposed of underneath the ground using lawn and around the trees. And I'd say, I'm not sure about the design of this system, but it'll be like that. It's not something, it's not like a treatment plant you see as a council pump station or something like that that's going to come out of the ground. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct.
Yeah, so what you're going to see is probably tops of 3 concrete tanks in the ground. And so what I've been hearing is they're much worried about seeing these treatment plants. But they're not going to be what you're thinking. They're not going to be structures and anything like that. Like they're in the tanks, there's 3 different tanks that come to each other. The third tank comes out and disposal area. But look, it is a golf course at the moment. A golf course is a classified as open space if that's what's on the plan, but it hasn't been changed. And it's just a matter of bringing that back to the council and getting it changed. So but look, you find it easy if everyone works together with these projects. And
Absolutely.
You're not going to get 100% people going to be happy with it. But at the end of the day, we get developers and people come into this region and come in to do developments. And then what happens is we work with confidence in developers. When they come in to buy something, we don't drain their pockets because what happens is they know other people and they go to other people and say, don't go to Harvey Bay because this is the experience I had. So
people want to get out of the Sunshine Coast, and they're looking at here. Further north is too far away from Brisbane and Bangor, where they come from. So we've got houses going on to look. And look, I'm here just watch and see what's I'll just hear some of the questions. And look, I think I'd just like to say, I know I've said the right thing about the treatment, but that's why I see this. I never said any higher. I never said any higher. Look, the ones I've seen are in brand new tanks.
They said 2.5.
Well, it depends on how they're constructed. Well, I'm 800.
Yeah, it's just to supplement some of the comments that they made, apart from the sewage treatment. I think, apart from the environmental concerns, the other issue is that people in certain Cove and River Heads, they have chosen to move out of town, out into those semi-rural, 2,000 square metre blocks. We don't have any services out there. Now, high-density retirement villages are great in their own environment, but they should be, ideally, connected to town sewage, and they should be in a location where they have medical services and access to, buses or whatever. Riverheads, Turtle Cove, we have nothing. It's a totally inappropriate place to put high-density retirement or over 55 village. Apart from the environmental issues, the demographics are just totally misaligned with that area, and that's why I strongly suggest that you encourage the development of those 2,000 square metre blocks with their own eco-friendly septic systems or sewage systems, and that's why people move out there, to enjoy that lifestyle, not for high density living and areas that don't have any services to support.
And there's one entrance to Turtle Cove, one entrance out they've done the hill. It's already busy on that corner.
I've read a lot of the stories, a lot of the things on Facebook and different things about there's only one exit entrance and all this, of fires and different things like that. But in the building code, you've got to have fire exits, fire accesses and different things like this. I read these things all the time, but I do know the other side of it. And can I say, a lot of your houses out there, I probably drew them up because I was a building designer in this area for 21 years. I drew about 3,500 houses, and a lot of them are all over that area there too. And people saying that they're living on the hill and they'll be looking over this estate, what they do down the bottom. People were living on the hill before other houses were built down on the bottom of them anyway. So it's just a part of progress. Like I lived in Rowan Way.
It's the problem, it's the sewage.
You guys don't have houses in that front of you, but you didn't know that the golf course wasn't going to be there. They were putting it.
Well, these people in Yellow Waters, it's a part of the policies that we've got in council, is people can do a material change of use, and that's exactly what's happening here. And
is there anything stopping them material change of use going to the 2,000 square metres? What's stopping that?
Because the Progress Association.
No. That's where did you come up with that? You haven't.
I'll show you how big the land is, and I'll show you how much the Progress Association reduced it to now. And that's from the government. I'll get that one.
Was it the Progress Association or the government that changed the availability of land? I don't understand.
Well, the Progress Association claimed that the birds had to have a distance, a buffer. We designed a buffer up to 100 metres, and then they wanted 250 metres. What I'm going to show you... I'm sorry? Yes? That's correct, yes. But what I'm trying to point out here is what land I've got left to be able to cut into half-acre blocks. And I'll bring the plan up after you've had a little bit of a snack and something. No doubt you might be feeling a little thirsty. There's drinks in the esky there, and there's cheese platter and so forth. Yes, Richard?
No, I'm actually a representative of council, but I do take interest in town planning.
What question I'll ask you, the first thing was the resort plan for the area, and I understand that had approval that didn't lapse. Could the developer still do that, even though it would be closer than 250 metres, excluding the golf course part?
I'm not quite sure what you're saying is. See,
The development plan,
yes,
and that development had council approval. That's for the golf course.
but see, it might have been an approval, but it's been put into the town plan.
So apparently that never.
I've only got about 10 hectares left out of the because of this buffer that I've That's what we had before. We had everything in there, medical services. We had a hotel. We had everything. Flying over 300.
10 years. It's on there, but you'll find that some things that are actually on there on that town plan that we're about to change again have had a material change of use and had an agreement through council. And so where it says there's going to be a set of resorts or a resort or something, it could be townhouses now. Where another developer's come along and purchased that piece of land, where it says it's going to be a resort unit there, and he decided to put townhouses on it. So he comes to the council, and that's what a material change of... I mean? The golf course. The resort, if it's on there, but it was actually open space, which is a golf course, I feel. Look, I think what I'll do is I'll get the town plan to talk to the developer and just to let them have a look to see what they can do with it. But how many people here, say if they can put housing development on there, how many people here would be unhappy about that?
What, 2,000 square metre blocks?
Well, yeah, or virtually what's around, what house blocks you've got around there now, what size are they?
2,000.
Yeah, or something similar, because you're going to need that to get your treatment plants on.
Ask the question.
Yeah. How many people would be not happy about, not happy?
Not happy. Oh, sorry.
That's why we suggested.
Well, it's something...
We suggested this years ago, but it wasn't.
Well, it's something that I have a talk.
There is now, page 350.
Sewage plant proposed.
Most of those people, they need to get to hospitals. They need to have a backup of people coming in.
Yes.
I think it's good to have those things, but Riverheads is not the right area for a large amount of people who need to be closer to the city, the hospital.
Correct.
things like that.
Correct.
And there are still vacant beds in nursing homes and hospitals in Harvey Lakeside.
Yes.
Here's another idea. Yeah, here's another idea that I've got is, I'm just looking at the piece of land that's virtually left over there and they're doing a lot in Redlands. I'd just like to speak to you.
This is a bit here.
Now that's what you've got left over, but you've got that buffer zone between...
That's all the red stuff.
The red zone. Now that's 250 metres. What would the people think is they do it in Redlands is they actually put land, they put the environmental land on one side of the road and the houses on the other. And that gives people the use of, they can walk along the other side of the road and they're not walking on the houses. We're actually going down in about 2 months' time to Redlands to have a look at this system because that's what we're going to try and implement into our town plan here. And that would be something that you could work here. But
If their homes are not high density living, yes.
that's what they're doing at Redlands. They're doing housing developments. But when you look out your front door, you've got a road going past there. But across is parkland and is all watercourses. They have bike paths on it. They have car parking on it. But if the community would give the developer support to take that buffer zone back.
Isn't that up to the Commonwealth Government, right?
But what happens then is if the community support the development to get a better development, then that can go back to the federal government and show the federal government that the community are happy with it.
But if we agree to the buffer being moved back, what stops the developer from changing from 2,000 square metres back to high density? What stops him from changing the plan?
Look, there'd be a condition to that. Like you'd say, okay, we'll give you a buffer zone if you do a good design, push it back. But as long as you do 2,000 square metre blocks, because what actually happened is you're living on the other side of the road from where the birds and everything are, but you can look out your front window and you can look straight across the waterways and everything like that. I think they'd be very valuable blocks, but
That's if your buildings, the retirement homes is built in front of my place or behind mine. I'll see nothing but the bloody buildings.
Yeah, we're not talking
Water like now or Fraser Island or the birds. I'll be able to see nothing but another building.
it was like me when I lived in Rowan Way. The house next door to me there was a big house. I had views to Fraser Island. Right? The house next door to me came along and built a big house next door, and our patio, we lost all our views. But if you want to buy that block of land behind you, that's what my wife and I said. We keep looking back and saying we should have bought that block of land. We would have had perfect views. But we've got to look at working together. And excuse me. The buffer zone is there to protect the curlews, but if you have a road between there and where people are living, I feel that there's a way that you can actually do it. But you've all got to work together to solve the problem. And if you don't want to work together, we'll put a hand. Excuse me.
It's nothing to do with Eloy Waters. It's completely different. There is a green parkland involved there.
I said Eloy Waters was a zone golf course. It's exactly the same as what this is, and it's been changed because it's open space. This is actually classified as open space. I'm not saying it's in the same area as Eloy Waters. I'm saying I just took it as a reference that was what. So that's what I was virtually saying.